Okay.
So who would like to pray us in while I finish this email?
Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the sunshine. Woo! It was great. Thank you for giving us health and the smarts to do all this technical stuff with all these wires so that we can see each other and meet each other and keep us healthy and safe, and bless everybody as we made this, the bishop made this decision. So, in your name, Lord, amen.
Amen.
Did you guys hear it? Did they hear it?
Thumbs up if you heard Christy. No? Because the mic was working.
I wonder about that speaker.
No, the
We
speaker's
heard her better before the speaker.
No, the speaker's working fine.
Yeah, but she was real close then.
Oh,
Yeah,
So
that's true.
just standing over there. So get over there.
okay.
Go.
Okay.
Must be directional.
Can you hear me now? No? Okay.
Like that commercial.
How weird.
That's weird because the microphone, it's shaped like a mouse, like the computer mouse, and it looks like it's multi-directional.
You want to start it and stop it again, or no?
Really well.
Oh.
Yeah, he's right there.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna restart it. Okay, we'll see what happens.
Maybe it
Okay.
was on standby.
So, no.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Say something?
Hello?
No.
No?
Oh.
Gee, and I have a big mouth.
I know she's talking, but I don't know what she's saying.
Hello! How about that? No?
No? Wow.
Is it plugged in?
It's they can hear me.
Yeah, but they heard you
You're
before.
right there.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, so we have to walk up to the stand
One
and
last
give
thing.
our answers.
One last thing. Okay, now.
Hello?
Hello.
Nothing? You guys didn't hear it? Karen and Christy both spoke. Did you guys hear that or no?
Guess not.
Can you guys hear me now? Oh, goodness.
Okay, this is weird.
Well, we might have to find a different microphone. Okay.
That's okay.
All righty.
Christie's on timeout.
Pardon?
Christie's on timeout.
Oh, who's trying to get in? Rich. I guess I did too much work today. Okay, Rich.
Now I hear her.
Yeah, now we hear you.
Yeah, 'cause I'm right by the computer.
So,
Just move the computer forward. Okay. Hi, Rich. Okay.
all right. Well, we're going to get started.
Okay.
Okay, Matthew chapter 23 and 24. We are in Tuesday of Holy Week. So things are starting to get tense for Jesus. The Pharisees and everybody else are trying to get him in trouble, trying to catch him. And like I said, it's going to get pretty tense. Once again, we have a ton of supplementary readings. So thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. And they're all in your emails. So,
And we have 3 people online, so wave.
all right, 3 people online. Good morning. Good morning. If I'm at church, it must be morning. I struggle with that all the time. Okay, as we heard last week, whenever Jesus mentions crowds, he's talking about the Jewish people that might be potential disciples. So in verse 1, we hear that Jesus is speaking to the crowds and his disciples. So the disciples, those are the apostles and everybody else who's following Jesus closely. The teachers of the law, now those are scribes. And what I found out is scribes might be professionals, might be Pharisees, but every Pharisee was not a scribe. So these were like the lawyers of the time. They're educated people, they're professionals, and they're educated in Torah and its application. And remember, Torah was like the law of the Jewish people. So it would make these people just like lawyers. So Jesus is talking to the crowds and his disciples and the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. So Jesus is saying the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seat. So that's the teaching and the administrative authority of the synagogue. Now the Pharisees, of course, they weren't rabbis, they were not educated people, but they were high up in the synagogue. So they had a lot of power. Think of them like church elders in a Christian church. Jesus is talking about these people. And he's telling the disciples and the crowds of Jewish people, you have to be careful to do everything the Pharisees and the scribes tell you to do. Because if you don't, they're going to make life hard for you. Remember the Pharisees and the scribes, they created over 613 laws. And they're all very burdensome. And the people had to comply by all those laws. Or they might even be kicked out of the synagogue. And that's like their only source of public content. And of course, if you're kicked out of the synagogue, you don't have any chance of getting to heaven ever.
According to them.
According to them.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
According to them. So Jesus is saying, be careful to do everything they tell you to do, but don't do what they do, because they don't practice what they preach. So they were more, the scribes and the Pharisees were kind of like the people who do as I say, not as I do, because I don't do the right things. And Jesus goes on to say, everything the Pharisees and the scribes do in verse 5 is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries, and remember from our study of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, the phylacteries, those were those little leather boxes where they kept portion of the Torah in it. And they either wore it on their foreheads or their arms. Because God told them, you have to carry my word with you always. But I think what God was really saying is, carry it in your hearts. You don't have to make boxes. And the Pharisees and the scribes, they always made sure they had a real big box. So that you thought, well, maybe they've got the whole Torah in there, or these are really religious people. And Jesus is also saying they make the tassels on their garments long. And we remember from our study of Numbers and Deuteronomy, where God told them that they have to wear these little tassels on their coats so they remember the law. So God had a reason for this. When they looked down at their tassels, they would kind of remember the law. It's kind of like if we would wear a cross, it reminds us of Jesus' sacrifice for us. So that's what these tassels were for. But they make them excessively... Yes, Gary?
Did they change the verses they put in these little boxes all the time?
I don't know.
On this question and answer, it gave 4 verses.
Yes, yeah.
From Exodus and some Deuteronomy. I don't know if they changed them. They would have had to have memorized.
I would, well...
Speculate.
And we know that Jewish children, when they make their bar mitzvah or their bat mitzvah, they have to memorize Hebrew and they have to memorize Torah. So it's still an ongoing process for Jewish children. So Gary, I think they did have the majority of the Torah memorized, and perhaps these verses were just something that they felt they needed to carry around at all times. But you're right, it was just those 4 verses. And if they're written small enough, I suppose they could jam them in there. Okay. So Jesus goes on. They have the big boxes, their tassels and their garments are long, and they love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats of the synagogue because they want to be seen. They want people to see them that, hey, I'm here, honor me. They love to be called rabbi. And they were just all into titles and everything else. And the most important seats in the synagogue, if you remember from our Old Testament study, the synagogue kind of had like a rectangular shape, and all the people sat in the rectangle part, almost like a horseshoe, and the rabbis and teachers would sit up front facing all the other people. So eyes were always on them. And what they would do is they would stand to read the Torah, and then they would sit down for their teaching. So that's where they would sit up front. Oh, and then Jesus says they like to be greeted with respect and called rabbi by others. And then Jesus kind of turns towards the disciples and the crowds, and he says, but you guys are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher. You are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor. So here Jesus is telling them, you guys can't call yourself rabbis, you can't call yourself teachers, because only God the Father teaches you everything. And
Verse 9 was taken out of the Catholic Bible. Do not call anyone on earth your father.
You know, I don't think they would have taken it out, Gary, but because they added some books, and the Catholic Bible is called the Apocrypha, or the Catholic Bible is called with the Apocrypha, because it has those extra books that Protestants don't have. But I don't think they removed anything. But that's a good point. And since Catholics aren't allowed to read the Bible, everybody's safe. So, but I'm only kidding, because there are some Catholics who do read the Bible. It's recommended to them that they don't, because their priest is supposed to interpret it for them. But I'm sure that they do read the Bible.
Catholic women in our Bible study in the group I was with in Florida. And one of my good friends was very diligent about her study, and she always said, I am learning so much.
Yeah. Yep. And I remember the funniest thing, when we first started reading the Bible, when we attended Methodist Church, we were reading it, it's like, this is strange. Jesus has brothers and sisters. But if Mary was always a virgin, how could he have brothers and sisters? Because as a Catholic, you're told that Mary was always a virgin, and, well, those other kids, they were from Joseph's first marriage, or they were adopted, or some other excuse. But we know differently now. So in these verses where Jesus is talking to the disciples, from verse 8 through verse 11, do you guys notice anything weird?
The word you?
Yeah. The word you.
It's in there a lot.
The word you and the word, it's either you or your, but it's mostly you. Mm-hmm. It's in there 8 times. So Jesus is making sure that he's addressing the disciples, and he's driving the point home. You guys. And what he's doing is he's telling them that when you start the Christian church, you're not supposed to fashion it on the Jewish synagogues. I don't want you to have a lot of hierarchy. I don't want you to have all these different levels, because remember back to Exodus, before the Israelites screwed up. In Exodus 19, God told them, you are to be a nation of priests. So God's design for the church was always that everybody involved would get involved in the work of the church. And as we get into, I had a flashback to my Ephesians Bible study, which was for ordination, where Paul talks about the evangelists and the teachers, so I digress. But anyway, we're all supposed to work in the church. And that's the good thing about the Methodist Church, is the way it was designed is when the pastor was out on the road, on horseback going from church to church, the laity, all the people of the church, they would run the church. They would take turns preaching. They would take turns, well, they wouldn't take turns. They would all evangelize. They would all invite their neighbors. And the only thing that they couldn't do, they couldn't baptize, they couldn't do marriages, and they couldn't give communion. So that had to wait until the pastor got back in town. So that's why we only have monthly communion, because of the Methodist system. But the way it was designed was that everybody in the church would get involved. And that's why the Methodist Church grew so fast, because everybody was pushing the church forward all the time. And at one time, I think they said 30% of all the Christians in the U.S. were Methodists. So it was the biggest denomination. Until we started settling in the cities, and then we kind of lost that drive. But anyway, so Jesus is telling them, you guys set up the church in the way I'm telling you. And the way he tells us to set up the church is, the greatest among you will be your servant. So Jesus is kind of saying, I don't really want you to have a lot of leaders. I don't want you to have a lot of hierarchy. But what did we do? When we started coming up with denominations, we had a lot of hierarchy. We got a lot of rules. So we're kind of falling away from the way we should be doing church. But that's the way it goes. So after Jesus addresses the disciples in how he wants them to set up the church, he goes back to the teachers and the scribes and the Pharisees. And in the next section, in most Bibles, it's called the 7 woes on the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. And of course we know 7 is a perfect number, so Jesus is saying is, these things are going to happen to you people, you're wrong, and then he just lays into them. So let's get started. Woe number 1. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourself do not enter, nor will you let any of those enter who are trying. So here Jesus is talking about the 613 laws that the Pharisees and the scribes created. And he said, you made it so tough on people to get into heaven. Nobody can keep one of these laws, and you gave them 613. And Jesus also says, you guys aren't even worried about getting into heaven. You're just worried about your place here on earth. So they were just worried about their money, their prestige, and that's the big reason they went after Jesus, is they knew that if Jesus was popular, they wouldn't be popular.
Oh, we're missing a verse.
Huh?
We're missing
Where? Oh, yeah.
12.
Okay. And what Christy's talking about is in the NIV Bible, it shows a 14 in brackets. Now, do any of you guys have a verse 14 in chapter 23? No? Okay. So, some translations of the Bible don't have it, like NIV doesn't have it, but other manuscripts, other versions, have words similar to either Mark or Luke. And those words are, once again, Jesus is talking about the Pharisees. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished more severely. So what Jesus is talking about is they don't really care how much money anybody has. You have your temple tithe, and they make sure you pay it. And it's pretty hefty. When we lived in Arlington Heights, a couple of our friends went to synagogue in Buffalo Grove, and I think it was something like, what, $10,000
To join.
So they had to pay a membership fee up front, and then they had an annual tithe that they had to write the check. I think it was first of the year, and it was pretty hefty. So it still exists today. So Jesus is saying,
Pastor.
yes, sir.
All right, in the verse, you shut the door of kingdom of heaven in people's faces, in the Beatitudes in chapter 5, verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Missler made a point saying that the Beatitudes and the woes are kind of opposites.
Okay, that would make sense.
More of those, but it's interesting to go back and look at the woes and then the Beatitudes, the good and the bad. Those Pharisees were rotten.
Yeah, they were just worried about their jobs. Oh, you hit the nail right on the head, Gary.
Rotten Pharisees.
And Jesus laid it into him. You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, that you won't let them in. So that's woe number 1. Woe number 2. Teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are.
Woo!
Wow. So, of course, whoever they convert, they're going to be trained and taught by these Pharisees and scribes, so they're going to have the same training. That's why it's very essential for us all to read the Bible. It's essential for us to know our doctrine so that when we listen to a sermon and something doesn't seem quite right, if we don't remember reading that in Scripture, we need to ask the preacher, could you tell me where you got that from? And if they can't show you, or if they can't say, let me get back to you with that verse, then you need to leave that church, because they could be leading you down the wrong path. So always ask questions. I may not be able to give you the chapter and verse right away, but I'll follow up with you real quick and I'll tell you exactly where it came from.
Stephen messed up, or whatever article I found, that Stephen saw no one on the left side of the throne. All he saw was heaven. Good catch.
Well, and if they weren't, if it was something inconsequential, Gary, like if they were talking about believers' baptism or infant baptism, I could let it slide because that's not one of our major doctrines. But the article Gary's talking about is